Akbari et al. BMC, nursingdoi.org/10.1 186/S1-2912-022-01044-4. BMC Nursing, Research Open Access, Muslim Nurses' Spiritual Sensitivity as a Higher Perception and Reflection Towards Spiritual Care, a Qualitative Study in Southeast Iran, Omolbanan Akbari 3, Mahlaga Dagan 2, and Batul Tirgari 1. Check for updates. Abstract. Background. Spiritually sensitive nurses perceive the spiritual attitudes and feelings of others. They play a positive role in providing spiritual care to patients. Spiritually sensitive nurses deal appropriately with suffering, frustration, and spiritual dysfunction. Therefore, the present study aimed to explain Iranian nurses' experiences of spiritual sensitivity. Methods. This qualitative descriptive explorative study used conventional content analysis and purposeful sampling to explain the experiences of Iranian nurses. N = 19. This study used in-depth semi-structured interviews with 19 nurses, as well as maximum variation sampling to gather rich information: age, sex, religion, work experience, level of education, marital status, type of hospital and ward, from March 2021 to January 2022. The current study also employed Guba and Lincoln criteria to increase data trustworthiness, and Granheim and Lundman approach to analyze the content. Results. The research data showed 497 codes, 1 theme, 3 categories, and 6 subcategories. The theme of nurses' spiritual sensitivity as a higher perception and reflection toward spiritual care included 3 categories of the spiritual and professional: character of the nurse, perception of the spiritual needs of patients and their families, and the nurse's reflection on the religious beliefs of patients and their families. Conclusion. Spiritual sensitivity helps a nurse to provide holistic care for patients and their families. Therefore, managers and policymakers should create guidelines to help nurses become more spiritually sensitive, as well as to meet spiritual needs of patients. Further quantitative and qualitative research should confirm these results in other social and cultural contexts. Keywords: spiritual sensitivity, nurses, Muslim, qualitative research, Iran, correspondence. Batul Tirgari batul.tirgari@gmail.com, b_tirgari@kmu.ac.ir. Nursing Research Center, Kerman University of Medical Sciences, Kerman, Iran. 2 Department of Critical Care Nursing, Razi Faculty of Nursing, and Midwifery, Kerman University of Medical Sciences, Kerman, Iran. 3 Department of Medical Surgical Nursing, Razi Faculty of Nursing and Midwifery, Kerman University of Medical Sciences, Kerman, Iran. BMC. Copyright the author S. 2022. Open access. This article is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution 4 International License, which permits use, sharing, adaptation, distribution, and reproduction in any medium or format, as long as you give appropriate credit to the original author, S, and the source, provide a link to the Creative Commons license, and indicate if changes were made. The images or other third-party material in this article are included in the article's Creative Commons license, unless indicated otherwise, in a credit line to the material. If material is not included in the article's Creative Commons license, and your intended use is not permitted by statutory regulation, or exceeds the permitted use, you will need to obtain permission directly from the copyright holder. To view a copy of this license, visit creativecommons.org/licenses/by/4.0/. Creative Commons. Public Domain Dedication Waiver. creativecommons.org/public-domain/0/1.0/ applies to the data made available in this article, unless otherwise stated in a credit line to the data. Background them. On the other hand, most studies emphasize the holistic nursing refers to nurses' knowledge, skills, and importance of spiritual sensitivity, and mentioned general theories to deliver care and engage in therapeutic comp definitions. The following questions might help to clarify communication. 1. Holistic care meets physical, psycho. The key problems concerning spiritual sensitivity, what logical, social, and spiritual needs in patients. 2. Holistic. Exactly. Does spiritual sensitivity in nursing mean? What nursing takes into account, the beliefs and values of each are its features. What are the examples of spiritual sen person? 1. Spirituality seeks meaning and purpose. Sensitivity. What circumstances cause spiritual sensitivity to human beings, as well as perceives life and natural forces manifest? It is clear that concepts find meaning within in the world. Thus concepts, such as spirit and spiritu-social contexts, and the meaning of a concept varies from ality, can have a variety of definitions. 3. Every person context to context. Therefore, a detailed exploration of A has their own definition of spirituality influenced by concept, requires local, cultural, social, and managerial, their personal beliefs and value systems. 4. Spirituality, factors. 18. It is vital to explore spiritual sensitivity of according to Joseph et al., 2017, is a broad, unstructured, nurses in the healthcare system based on the lived extrapersonal and natural phenomenon in which one seeks alliances of field participants. Iran is a religious country connection with a greater force or objective. 5. Spiritu, with 99% of its people being Muslim. 19. People with ality has been identified as the essence of being human. Different religions live in Iran. Most Iranians are Shiite. 6. Healthcare professionals believe that spirituality is 80 to 90%. And the next popular religion is Sunni, 5 to 9%, a vital aspect of healthcare. 7. Spiritual nursing aims to Sistan and Baluchistan, a province at southeastern Iran, address the patient's anxieties, concerns, and suffering, has a high Sunni population. 20. The present study to relieve anxiety, promote hope, and enable patients to aim to explore nurses' experiences of spiritual sensitivity, inner peace. 8. Nurses perform spiritual intervention to a T in southeastern Iran. Shians based on ethical principles. Therefore, spiritual care can be considered as a moral issue, and nurses must be methods spiritually sensitive to provide spiritual care. 9. Study design and setting. The term spiritual sensitivity refers to the able-this, qualitative descriptive explorative study used quantity to see and understand the spiritual perspectives and conventional content analysis, a qualitative method for an experiences of others. 9. The structure of spiritual sensitivity, written, oral, or visual communication messages. Sensitivity is one in which the visible actions of people are the purpose of content analysis study, is to obtain a brief in harmony with their spiritual ideals, according to and comprehensive description of the phenomena. 21. Strauss Romaniowska and others, 2016. Sensitivity covers VAL. The current study tried to analyze the latent content as UES, ideals, emotions, and the results of activities per, well as the manifest content. This study was conducted formed. 10. Spiritual sensitivity involves considering in Zahedan, Sistan, and Baluchistan province, Southeast spiritual values in a paradoxical context, and being Iran. The inhabitants are both Sistani and Baluch, as size of one's tasks and obligations within that context, well as Muslim, but their dialects and religions differ. The spiritual sensitivity identifies right and wrong easily, and Sistani people speak Persian and are Shiite, while Balu leads to performing the correct thing. 11. Kazemi et al-Chi people are Sunni. 22. Although they are different in 2021, defined spiritual sensitivity as the attention to the religion and language, they coexist and interact with each spiritual values of a situation and responsibility for that other. The healthcare system also employs nurses of both situation. 12. Callahan, 2018, believed that spiritual ethnicities to provide care to patients, sensitivity was necessary to convey spiritual competence. 13. Spiritual sensitivity allows us to be aware of religious sampling, participant, and data collection and spiritual issues, and to respond to individuals' faith. The present study interviewed nurses working at hospice-based concerns. 14. Spiritual sensitivity is a key aspect tells Affiliated with Zahedan University of Medical Science, Holistic Care. Spiritual sensitivity makes it possible to NSs, Zooms, as well as nurses from corona centers, and respond to the needs of patients better. Spiritual sensitive semi-public hospitals, affiliated with other organizations. IDI improves relationships between healthcare private inclusion criteria, where nurses with a bachelor's degree ERs, and patients, and increases patient satisfaction. 12. Or a higher degree in nursing. Clinical work experience, therefore, in addition to spiritual knowledge, healthcare, and a desire to express their experiences. The current professionals require spiritual sensitivity to face spiritual study, used purposeful sampling to select participants, and moral obstacles in their everyday work. 15. Interviewed nurses to obtain rich and varied information. The review of literature showed that the definitions the current study selected various personal and occupa provided were general definitions of spiritual sensitivational characteristics, such as sex, age, religion, marital, and were not specific to nurses. 10, 16, 17. These define status, level of education, work experience, position, type shans, focus on the values and sense of responsibility for, of hospital, public, semi-public, and type of wards to. Table 1. Participants' characteristics. N equal to 19. Participants' sex male, 4 female. 15. Age, YR, minimum 25, maximum 55. Religion, Shiite 10. Sunni 9. Marital status, single 5. Married, 14. Work experience minimum 1. Maximum 30. Level of education. Bachelor's degree. 10. Master's degree. 6. PhD. 3. Religiosity, none. 4. Low 4. Moderate 5. High 6. Spirituality, none low. 2. Moderate 9 high. Type of ward. Emergency. 13. Medical 7. ICU 10. Operating room 1. CCU 6. Coronary 3. Angiography. 2. Hematology 2. Infection 4. Surgery 7. Nursing Management Office 3. Orthopedics 1. Psychiatrics 2. Gynecology 2. Pediatrics 6. Dialysis and nephrology 4. Some participants had work experience in different hospitals and wards. Table 2 examples of questions. 1. As you have provided care for different patients, would you please explain what spiritual needs did your patients have? 2. What were the spiritual needs of patients with different religions, cultures, and languages? 3. How did you respond to the spiritual needs of these patients? 4. What conditions did you require to respond better to these needs? 5. What circumstances prevented you from responding to the patient's spiritual needs? 6. What were the consequences of your reaction to the patient's spiritual needs? Provide a wide range of information. 15 female and 4 male nurses were available. The nurses' ages ranged from 2005 to 55 years, and their work experience ranged from 1 to 30 years. Table 1. The method of data collection was interviews and field notes. The researcher first visited participants and explained the research objectives. She interviewed participants in their workplace. All participants participated in the study and wanted to share their experiences. The first researcher conducted open-ended, semi-structured, in-depth and individual interviews to collect data. Open-ended questions in the interview guide allow respondents to explain their own experiences, and follow-up questions were the result of the participants' responses. Table 2 showed questions that reflected participants' experiences of spiritual sensitivity. The researcher audio recorded and transcribed 30 to 75-minute interviews. Verbatim. The researcher continued sampling until data saturation, meaning that new information was unavailable. The researcher reached data saturation after 22 interviews with 19 participants. She also used and recorded field notes in different shifts in the hospital. In general, she conducted 22 interviews and 6 field notes with 19 participants. She re-interviewed 3 participants to clarify some of their statements. She did sampling from March 2021 to January 2022. Data analysis. The current study used MaxQDA 20% to manage data, as well as Granheim and Lundman's conventional content analysis method to guide analysis. 23. In the present study, each interview served as a unit of analysis. The researcher divided the text into meaning units, each of which had content and context-related words, phrases, or paragraphs. Table 3 contains examples in this regard. She then condensed meaning units, while maintaining the theme. She coded them and created subcategories and categories. The present study obtained the theme of nurses' spiritual sensitivity as a higher perception and reflection toward spiritual care. Table 4. Although the analysis process was systematic, a back-and-forth movement was available between the whole and the components of the text. Table 3 summarizes the analytical procedure used for each text. Table 4 summarizes all categories and subcategories. The analysis process lasted from March 2021 to January 2022. Trustworthiness. Qualitative research uses 4 criteria for data: trustworthiness, credibility, dependability, confirmability, and transferability. 24. The present study used several methods to increase data trustworthiness. The researcher tried to spend enough time, 11 months, to collect data, continuously evaluated the data, and established a good relationship with participants. In order to collect in-depth data, the researcher tried to select participants with different characteristics, maximum variation. The participants reviewed a short report of the analyzed. Table 3, example of qualitative content analysis process, meaning unit condensation code. Subcategories. Categories theme. I believe in God, who sees the deeds of his servants every The nurse sees God as a nurse's spiritual, the spirit nurses meant, and he has sent prophets to guide us. Therefore I definitely witness to their actions belief in God's characteristics, to all and spirit adhere to a series of principles, and I try my best to pay attention, and pays attention to the existence professional tool, to the spirituality of the sick, patient's spiritual needs character of sen after the CPR. We try to keep the patient's foot facing the Qibla, the nurses oblige them. The nurses professional the nurse. Sitivan turn the bed, and we put a headset on the patient's ears to selves to do these actions. Commitment characteristics as a listen to verses of the Quran and Yasin Surah. For a dying patient to provide higher care for a purdying patient, SEP. Some older ICU patients for example would be quite disap. The nurse noticed that patients' mental states perception she on pointed if they were conscious, and did not complete their. The patient was undissatisfac, of patients and prayers. Happy for not completing Sion, with not their families and fame reflect prayers. Completing lies spiritual shen prayers. Needs towards spirit. There were patients who needed open heart surgery. The nurse perceived the patient's spiritual needs. Tool cess of becoming a candidate for heart surgery was stressful for patient's need for peace of patients and care the patient. Therefore, they needed to be calmed down. Of mind their families. I talked to patients about their diseases, and asked them how the nurse noticed the patient's real perception of nurses they coped with the diseases. They answered that they were patients' reliance on God. Ants on God, patients' acts reflection. Satisfied with God's plan. These diseases were not comparable to of worship of patients the suffering of the prophets, who were the best people in the world. Families of critically ill patients in the operating room. Stood the nurse noticed Tawa's family's top perception of religious behind the operating room. Prayed, read the Quran, paid nazar, or soul of high-risk patients washul to the family's acts of beliefs, sought intercession from Hazrat Abul Faisal al-Abbas families, to the holy imams worship imams. Table 4. Themes, categories, and subcategories, extracted from qualitative content analysis. Theme categories. Subcategories. Nurses spiritual. The spiritual and profsa's spiritual characteristics sensitivity. as a shinal character of the professional and ethical higher percept nurse characteristics shun, and reflect perceptions of spiritual mental states of patient toward conditions and needs of patients and their families. Spiritual care patients and their families, spiritual needs of patients and their families. Nurses' reflection on perception of patients' religious beliefs of patients. Acts of worship and their families. Perception of families' acts of worship. Data. Member check, to see how it reflected their experiences and attitudes. 2 professional CO researchers reviewed all extracted codes and categories to ensure the data credibility. To increase the dependability, peer checking was performed to see whether their viewpoints were comparable to that of the researcher. For this purpose, 2 researchers experienced in qualitative research confirmed the data dependability. To improve data confirmability, the study team designed a mind map during the research process. 2 members of the research team, qualitative research professionals, reviewed the transcripts of multiple interviews, as well as the extracted codes and categories, to assess the data coding procedure. To improve data transferability, the researcher distributed the research findings to a number of samples who were not participants, and obtained their opinions. They tried to discuss all the research stages in detail. Results. This qualitative content analysis aimed to explain and define the meaning, dimensions, and components of nurses' spiritual sensitivity based on the participants' experiences. The findings demonstrated a theme, 3 categories, and 6 subcategories. In addition, 497 codes remained after constant comparative analysis, condensation, and integration of codes. Table 4. Theme: Nurses' spiritual sensitivity as a higher perception and reflection toward spiritual care, according to the participants' experiences. Nurses' spiritual sensitivity as a higher perception and reflection toward spiritual care included 3 categories of the spiritual and professional character of the nurse. Nurses' perception of the patient's spiritual conditions and needs, and nurses' reflection on religious beliefs of patients and their families. The spiritual and professional character of the nurse. Most of the participants in this study reported that a spiritually sensitive nurse had some personality traits, including spiritual, moral, and professional characteristics. I believe the patient's companion is under a lot of pressure. They must experience the emotional poverty of the sick person and manage both the economic and emotional crises. Frequently, their demands are disregarded, and they must remain accountable. So long as their patient is enduring a terrible phase of sickness, no one can satisfy their own desires. Participant No. 2. A 41-year-old woman with 15 years of work experience. Spiritual characteristics. According to the participants' experiences, the spiritual characteristics of a nurse included nurses' belief in God existence, in God's plan for the patient, in patient's demands fulfilled by God, in patient's forgiveness of sins due to illness, as well as nurses' commitment to pray, complete prayers, fast, and read the Quran for patients. The participants acknowledged that when they recognized God in all professional situations, they did their best to discover the patient's spiritual needs and provide a holistic care to them. They wanted to help the people in need because of all the good things God had done for them. Nurses deal with patients of different religions in this province. According to the nurses' experiences, when a nurse is spiritually sensitive, they meet the spiritual needs of patients regardless of their beliefs. The Shiite and Sunni nurses present in this study paid equal attention to the spiritual needs of Shiite and Sunni patients. I know that God is present everywhere and observes my deeds. I always remind myself that because God helped me to my position, I am obligated to assist people in need. Participant No. 3. A 30-year-old man with 7 years of work experience. To me, the essence of humanity is more important than religion. Both Shiite and Sunni patients receive the same level of care. Participant No. 10. A 32-year-old Sunni man. According to nurses, everything is based on God's plan, and man is unaware of what God has planned for them. When something is accomplished, they realize that it has been God's plan. Spiritually sensitive nurses see themselves as a means to fulfill God's purpose and help critically ill patients to understand this issue. Perception of the conditions and needs of patients and their families. Participants in this study emphasized that a spiritually sensitive nurse always received feedbacks from patients and their families. These feedbacks helped the nurse to understand the condition of patients and their families, and to discover their spiritual needs. This category includes two subcategories: mental states of patients and their families and spiritual needs of patients and their families. A patient who had recently been diagnosed with AML was really distressed. I constantly reassured her that this illness was a test from God. I think God is concerned about his servants. Eventually, he will accomplish his plan. Participant No. 7. A 35-year-old Shiite woman working in the hematology department. Professional and ethical characteristics. According to participants' experiences, this subcategory included nurses' sympathy for patients and their families, patient-nurse close relationship, nurses' patience in providing care, nurses' empathy with patient, nurses' respect for patients' beliefs, patients' spiritual needs being satisfied by nurses regardless of their beliefs, the nurses' attention to human dignity, the nurses' respect for the spiritual beliefs of families, the nurse's commitment to provide care to an end-of-life patient, nurse's information about patients' acts of worship, nurse's responsibility to meet the patient's spiritual needs. According to the participants, nurses who feel sympathetic for patients and their families pay more attention to spiritual issues. A sympathetic nurse recognizes the pain and suffering of patients and their families and strives to relieve it. The mental states of patients and their families. Nurses participating in this study witness the patient's dissatisfaction with not doing acts of worship, the patient's sense of loneliness, the patient's fear of death, the patient's grief, the patient's regret and sense of guilt in personal life, the patient's frustration of the course of treatment, frustration of the patient's companion. According to the participants in this study, a spiritually sensitive nurse notices this sense of dissatisfaction and knows that acts of worship are very important for some patients, especially the older people. And if the patient is unable to perform these acts, they will feel guilty. Thus, nurses pave the way for patients to perform their religious acts. Some older ICU patients, for example, would be quite disappointed if they were conscious and did not complete their prayers. Participant No. 19. A 38-year-old Sunni female nurse. The nurse's experiences showed that families of critically ill patients were more likely to experience despair, hopelessness, and helplessness. Therefore, a spiritually sensitive nurse paid more attention to such families. There was a young patient who had needed a transplant. It was a dangerous procedure, and the doctor had warned the companions that it was highly improbable that the patient would survive. His family was utterly disappointed. Participant No. 18. A 34-year-old Shiite woman. The spiritual needs of patients and their families. Patients, according to nurses, needed spiritual support, religious instruction, peace of mind, and they required to practice acts of worship, and patients' families needed psychological support and peace of mind. According to participants, a spiritually sensitive nurse realizes the patient's need for religious instruction because they respond to disease with all their existential dimensions. Since a person's health depends on the equilibrium between all health dimensions, it is impossible to know one's body, mind, and social personality without spirituality. Some patients have to stay at hospital longer and want to complete their prayers during the time of admission. If their physical condition does not allow them to perform wudu, we will teach them how to do it. Participant No. 1. A 25-year-old Shiite woman. The participants' experience showed that a spiritually sensitive nurse had to focus on both the patient's and their family's peace of mind, and tried their best to calm them. Nurses believed that families' peace of mind was as important as that of critically ill patients. Families require peace of mind when hospital stays are lengthy, or when a patient's condition is so dangerous that they may die today or tomorrow during separate shifts. Therefore, we permit families to act on behalf of their patients. Participant No. 8. A 34-year-old woman with 11 years of work experience. The nurse's reflection on the religious beliefs of patients and their families. This category includes two subcategories of perception of patients' acts of worship and perception of families' acts of worship. Perception of patients' acts of worship. This subcategory included patients' trust in God during illness, their adherence to religious ceremonies, their tawassul to the holy imams, their belief in others' demands fulfilled by God, their adherence to complete prayers, read the Quran, fast, and praise God. Nurses participated in this study reported that when they witnessed patients' trust in God, they realized the patient's beliefs and paid attention to their spirituality. Patients believe in God and rely on Him. When I speak with them, I will see their trust. I realize their reliance on God. Participant No. 9, a 44-year-old woman with 20 years of work experience. Nurses participated in this study, reported patients' tawassul to the holy imams while caring for them. After observing the patients' tawassul to the holy imams, a spiritually sensitive nurse focused more on providing spiritual care. I saw a patient seeking intercession from the holy imams. I admired them for taking the imams and prophet as models and attempting to calm themselves via their beliefs. Participant No. 7, a 35-year-old Shiite woman. Perception of families' acts of worship. Families' acts of worship included their tawassul to the holy imams, their reliance on God, their adherence to read the Quran on the patient's bedside, their adherence to do acts of worship for a dying patient, their beliefs in others' demands fulfilled by God. According to participants, families seek intercession from the holy imams for recovery of their critically ill patients. A spiritually sensitive nurse sees families tawassul and tries to meet their spiritual needs. Families of critically ill patients stood behind the operating room, prayed, read the Quran, paid nazar, or sought intercession from Hazrat Abul Fazl al-Abbas. Participant No. 9, a 44-year-old woman with 20 years of work experience. The participants in the study acknowledged that families relied on God when their patients' recovery was beyond the power of the healthcare system. When a nurse notices families' reliance on God and their praying, she becomes sensitive to the family's spiritual needs. One of these patients was someone I know. I spoke with his family members, all of whom were distressed since their loved one's situation was not at all favorable. The physician had given up hope that the patient would recover. Even though the patient's mother was discouraged, she relied on God and continued to pray for her kid. Participant No. 9, a 44-year-old woman with work experience in general wards. Discussion. This study aimed to explain Iranian nurses' experiences of spiritual sensitivity. Based on the participants' experiences, spiritually sensitive nurses could meet patients' and families' spiritual and religious needs via their attention to the verbal and nonverbal feedback of those they cared for. The concepts of the spiritual and professional character of the nurse's perception of the patient's spiritual conditions and needs, and nurses' reflection on religious beliefs of patients and their families, were examples of nurses' spiritual sensitivity in the workplace. The spiritual and personal character of the nurse confirms their spiritual and professional characteristics. Based on the participants' experiences, spiritual characteristics included nurses' commitment to religious duties, and belief in God's existence, and plan for the patient's destiny. Batstone et al., 2020, also acknowledged that nurses' beliefs helped them to meet their patients' spiritual needs and give them spiritual care. 25. Other studies suggested that spiritually sensitive nurses were more likely to provide spiritual care. 26, 27. Another study showed that when a nurse prayed for a patient, they trusted in God's plan for the patient's future. 28. The participants' experiences also showed that a nurse's ability to develop spiritual sensitivity could be attributed to a variety of professional characteristics, such as sympathy for patients and their families, empathy, patience, one's own role in meeting patients' spiritual needs, and an appreciation for their inherent dignity. An Iranian study showed that nurses' moral characteristics, friendliness and communication skill, accountability and vitality, played a role in the nurse's perception of the patient's spiritual needs and provision of spiritual care. 27. Other studies indicated that the nurse's respect for the patient's spiritual beliefs and dignity were effective in providing spiritual care for the patient. 29, 30. A nurse's spiritual care for patients and their families does not always imply that the nurse is spiritually sensitive. External factors, such as organizational regulations, superior satisfaction, the need to make patients satisfied, and the desire to promote organizational position affect spiritual care provision. A person's spiritual sensitivity stems from inside and paves the way for voluntary provision of spiritual care. The results of this study showed that religion was ineffective in spiritual sensitivity, but the results of the other studies showed that religion did affect spiritual care. The second sign of spiritual sensitivity in a nurse is to perceive the spiritual conditions and needs of patients and their families. According to the participants' experiences, the mental states of patients and their families, such as feelings of loneliness, grief, fear of death, and dissatisfaction with not conducting acts of worship, influenced the spiritual sensitivity of nurses. A study showed that nurses' attention to the mental states of patients and their families led them to find and address patients' spiritual needs. 31. In addition, according to the participants' experiences, spiritual needs of patients and their families, including the need for spiritual support and peace of mind, affected nurses' spiritual sensitivity. Nurses must first identify these needs to provide spiritual care. A study showed that families of dying patients required spiritual support and peace of mind, which were ignored by some nurses. 32. Although nurses in the present study emphasized the importance of the spiritual needs of patients and their family members, studies revealed that healthcare professionals and nurses still paid little attention to patients' religious and spiritual needs compared to their needs for acute medicine. 33. 34. All nurses were unable to consider the mental states and spiritual needs of patients and their families in different situations. However, nurses' spiritual sensitivity addressed these mental states and spiritual needs and provided holistic care, which was evaluated in the present study as a dimension of spiritual sensitivity in nurses. Other studies mentioned this concept using terms such as intuitive sense, 31%, while the present study examined this concept deeply, leading to an in-depth perception of this concept. The third concept was the nurse's reflection on the religious beliefs of patients and their families, such as trusting in God and adhering to religious duties. Perceiving patients' spiritual differences enables nurses to respond to their spiritual needs. 35. Cruz et al., 2018, found that nurses' perception of the patient's spiritual needs allowed them to provide care for patients according to their spiritual values and beliefs. 36. According to the findings of the present study, a spiritually sensitive nurse understands and meets families' spiritual needs. This finding is consistent with that of other studies. 37. 38. Therefore, nurses should try to meet patients' spiritual needs based on that of patients. 39. Patients' religious differences and spirituality are effective in spiritual care provided by a nurse. The stronger the religious beliefs of patients and their families, the more attention the nurse pays to the patient's spiritual needs. The present study showed that spiritual sensitivity was provided voluntarily and regardless of the patient's religious beliefs. According to Iranian legislation, being a Muslim is one of the requirements for employment in many positions. Hence, all participants in the current study were Muslims. We were unable to obtain data from non-Muslim nurses, and we were limited in what we could do, due to the religious and cultural background of Iran and the fact that the phenomenon being studied is closely tied to religion. More quantitative and qualitative research in other social and cultural contexts is needed to confirm the findings of this study. Conclusion. The study results showed that the nurse's spiritual sensitivity is internal, causing the nurse to pay more attention and seek the spiritual needs of patients and their families. As a result, spiritual sensitivity leads nurses to provide holistic care. Nurses' spiritual sensitivity is difficult to assess, and generally, the provision of spiritual care is rarely a reason for spiritual sensitivity in the nurse, and spiritual sensitivity comes before the provision of spiritual care. Therefore, spiritual sensitivity should be institutionalized in nursing students, and curricula should focus on the spiritual sensitivity of nurses. Nurse managers should evaluate the spiritual sensitivity of nurses to find and eliminate the shortcomings of holistic care provision. In addition, to confirm the study findings, more quantitative and qualitative research should confirm the results in other social and cultural contexts, especially in non-religious ones. Acknowledgements. The authors would like to thank the participants in this study. Authors' contributions. OA, MD, and BT designed the study and collected data. OA, MD, and BT contributed to the study design. They provided critical feedback on the study and qualitative analysis, and inputted to the draft of this manuscript. OA wrote the manuscript. All authors have read and approved the final manuscript. Funding this research received no financial support from any funding agency in the public, commercial, or not-for-profit sectors. Data availability. The datasets used for the current study are available from the corresponding author upon request. Declarations. Ethics approval and consent to participate. The studies involving human participants were reviewed and approved by ir.kmu.res, 1399. 418. This study was conducted following the ethical guidelines outlined in the Declaration of Helsinki. The Ethics Committee of Kerman University of Medical Sciences approved all of the study's processes and procedures. Following confirmation, some explanations were given orally to the participants, including the study's objectives, the method of data collection and recording, the role of the researcher and the participants, and the observance of the privacy and confidentiality of the data, as well as the assurance that the participants were free to withdraw from the study at any time. The participants were then invited to participate in the study, and written informed consent was obtained. Consent for publication. Not applicable. Competing interests. The authors declare no competing interests. Received, May 31, 2022. Accepted, September 21, 2022. References. 1. Frisch N.C., Rabinowitz. D. What's in a definition? Holistic nursing, integrative healthcare, and integrative nursing. Report of an integrated literature review. J. Holis Nurse. 2019, 37th. 3. 260-72. DOI, https, doi, org. 1177, 898 trillion, 10,119,860,680. 2. Yusufa, Fitriasari R., Tristiana R., Nihayati, Hey. Development of Holistic Nursing Care Model for Mental Disorder Patients, Care in Indonesia. Indian J. Public Health. Res. Dev. 2019, 10, 1300. DOI, https, doi, org, 10, 5958/0976 to 5506.2019, 28.4.9. 3. Morgia C. Notarnicola I, Rocco G., Stevano A. Spirituality in Nursing, A Concept Analysis. Nurse Ethics. 2020, 27th, 5. 1327-43. DOI, https, doi, org, 10. 1177-969 trillion, 733 billion, 20 million, 109,534. 4. Lalani. And Meanings and Interpretations of Spirituality in Nursing and Health. Religions. 2020 Noen. 428. doidoi.org/10.1097/ HNP. .0000000000000000454. 5. Joseph R. P., Ainsworth B., Mathis L., Hooker S. P., Keller C., Incorporating Religion and Spirituality into the Design of Community-Based Physical Activity Programs for African American Women, A Qualitative Inquiry. BMC Res Notes. 2017, 10th, 1. 1-6. doidoi.org/10.1 186/S1310-017-2830-3. Hawthorne D.M., Gordon S.C. The Invisibility of Spiritual Nursing Care in Clinical Practice. J. Holis Nurs. 2020, 38. 1. 147 to 55. doi, https, doi, org, 10. 1177, 898 trillion, 10,119,000,000, 889,704. 7. Penman J. Finding Paradise Within, How Spirituality Protects Palliative Care Clients and Caregivers from Depression, J. Holist, Nurs. 2018, 36, 3. 243 to 54. doi.org/10.117/08980101177146665. 8. Weathers, E. McCarthy G. Coffee A. Concept Analysis of Spirituality, An Evolutionary Approach. Nurs Forum. 2016, 51. 2. 79 to 96. doi.org/10.1111/nuff 120128. 9. Monterang, L. A Model for Integrating Spiritual Nursing Care. In Nursing Practice, A Christian Perspective. Health Studies, University of South Africa. UNISA Institutional Repository, 2009. Doctor of Literature and Philosophy, DSET. Strass Romanowska M., Kowal J., Kapala M. How to Measure Spiritual Sensitivity at the IT User's Workplace. The Construction Process and Method of Validation of Spiritual Sensitivity Inventory, SSI. Econometrics, Econometria, 2016, 2. 52nd, 53 to 76. doi.org/10.15616.2016.2.05. Jednact. Zhang Y, Pal Rai, Tam WSW, Li A, Ong M. 2. LH. Spiritual Perspectives of Emergency Medicine Doctors and Nurses in Caring for End-of-Life Patients, a Mixed Method Study. Int Emerg Nurs. 2018, 37, 322. doi, https, doi, org, 10.1016, j.inj, 2017.7.001. Devenact, Kazemi Sai, Jafari A., Rabieh L., Nikfarjam M., Omidi M., Masoudi R. Exploring the Concept of Spiritual Sensitivity from the Perspectives of Healthcare Providers in Iran, J. Relic Health. 2021, 1-16. doi.org/10.1007/s 10943 021-01000-404-5. Trinact. Callahan Am, Benner K. Building Spiritual Sensitivity Through an Online Spirituality Course. J. Rehlig. Spiritual Social Work, Social Thought, 2018, 37, 2, 182 to 201. doi.org/10.10806/15426/418.144557. C. Charnact. Feng M.L., Sixsmith J., Sinclair S., Horst G. A Knowledge Synthesis of Culturally and Spiritually Sensitive End-of-Life Care, Findings from a Scoping Review. BMC Geriater. 2016, 16th, 1, 1-14. doi.org/10.116/s1-2-877-016-028-2-6. Patnact. Rachel H., Chiara C., Robert K., Francesco S. Spiritual Care in Nursing, an overview of the measures used to assess spiritual care provision and related factors amongst nurses. Acta Biomedica, Atenei Parmensis, 2019, 90, Supple 4, 44-55. doi.org/10.2 3750/ABM.V90I4-S.8300. Cessnacht. Thierry K. Nokelainen. P. Spiritual Sensitivity Scale. In Thierry K. Nokelainen P. Editors. Measuring Multiple Intelligences and Moral Sensitivities in Education. Rotterdam. Sense Publishers. 2011. pp. 15-36. doi, https, doi, org, 10/1078-94 6000, and 91-758, 917. Stoyles G.J., Stanford B., Caputi P., Keating A. L., Hyde B. A Measure of Spiritual Sensitivity for Children. Int J. Children's Spiritual. 2012, 17, 3, 203, zu 15, doi, https, doi.org, 10.1080 1,364,436 times, doi 1080. Awesomenacht, Rogers B.L., Concepts, Analysis, and the Development of Nursing Knowledge. The Evolutionary Cycle. J. Adv. Nurs. 1989, 14th, 4, 330-5, doi, https, doi, org, 10/1111, J1365-2648.1, 189, JBs 3420, X. Devatanak, Al-Ansari B. Norouzi A. Thoam, De Sa. Mirzai M. Conagrave Chem. Alcohol Treatment Systems in Muslim-Majority Countries. Case Study of Alcohol Treatment Policy in Iran. NTJ Drug Policy. 2020, 80, 1, doi, https, doi, org, 10.101, j.drugpo.2,020,253. Devaset. Syed Bagheri Sheikh, Degan M. Koshab H. Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder and Post-Traumatic Growth Among Muslim CPR Survivors. J. Relig Health. 2020, 59, 6, 3157-67. doi.org/10.1007/S10943-019-00946-Z. 21. Lindgren B. M. Lundman B. Granheim. Abstraction and Interpretation During the Qualitative Content Analysis Process. Int. J. Nurs Stud. 2020, 108, 103,632, 1-6. doi.org/10.1016/j.enerstu.2.020.10363 2. Darban F. Metdapur Rabori R. Faroxadian J. Nuhi E. Sabzivari S. Family Achievements in Struggling with Schizophrenia. Life Experiences in a Qualitative Content Analysis Study in Iran. BMC Psychiatry. 2021, 21. 1 doi.org/10.1, 186/S1, 2888-020-0302, 5-W. Triog Tivende. Granheim. Lundman B. Qualitative Content Analysis in Nursing Research, Concepts, Procedures and Measures to Achieve Trustworthiness. Nurse Eductide. 2004, 24, 105 doi.org/10.1016/j.net.2003.10.001. 24. Kingus H. Karayainen M. LOS. The Trustworthiness of Content Analysis. The Application of Content Analysis in Nursing Science Research. Springer, 2020. pp. 41-8. doi.org/10.10 10.0.007/9783-030-30199-6_5. Batstone E. Bailey C. Hallett N. Spiritual Care Provision to End-of-Life Patients, A Systematic Literature Review. J. Klin Ners. 2020, 29th, 19-20, 3609-24. doi.org/101011/1.1.1.154.11.26. Taylor E. J., Gober Park C. Schoonover Schaffner K. Mamier the First, Somaya C. K. Badri K. Nurse Opinions about Initiating Spiritual Conversation and Prayer in Patient Care. J. Advi Ners. 2018, 74th, 10, 2381-92. doi.org/10.1111/. Jan. 13.777. 27. Musavi S. Rohani C. Borhani F. Akbari May. Factors Affecting Spiritual Care Practices of Oncology Nurses. A Qualitative Study. Support Care Cancer. 2019, 27, 3, 901-9. doi.org/10.1007/S005-20-018-437-8-8. 28. Farahani as. Rasuli M. Salmani N. Mojan L.K. Sajadi M. Haidarzadeh M. and others. Evaluation of healthcare providers' perception of spiritual care and the obstacles to its implementation. Asia Pacific J. Onkol Ners. 2019, 6, 2, 122-9. doi.org/10.410/apjon.apjon_69_18.29. Kadura B. Abu Shaheen A. Altanir M. Nurses, Perceptions of Spirituality and Spiritual Care at 5 tertiary care hospitals in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. A cross-sectional study. Oman Med J. 2018, 33, 2, 154-8. doi, https, doi, org, 10.5001, OMJ, 2000 and 18.2. 8. 30. Hurlianita R. Yen M. Chen Ch. Fetzer S.J. Lin Ek L. Perception of Spirituality and Spiritual Care Among Muslim Nurses in Indonesia. J. Relig Health. 2018, 57, 2, 762-73. doi.org/10.1007/S10943-017-043-7-6. 31. Gorbani M. Mohammadi E. Agabozorgi R. Ramezani M. Spiritual Care Interventions in Nursing, an Integrative Literature Review. Support Care Cancer. 2021, 29th, 3, 1165-81. doi.org/10.1007/S00520-05747-9. 32. Hennessy N. Neenan K. Brady V. Sullivan M. Eustace Cook J. Timmons F. End of Life in Acute Hospital Setting, A Systematic Review of Families' Experience of Spiritual Care. J. Klin Ners. May 29, 2020, 7-8, 1041-52. doi. https. doi. org. 101111 died 10164. 33. Ali Mohammadi N. Zia Irad M. Irajpur A. Amin Mansour B. Clinical Care Needs of Patients with Severe Traumatic Brain Injury in the Intensive Care Unit. Trauma Monthly. 2018, 23rd. 2, EFI 7883-3, doi.org/10.5812/. Traumamon 57883-34. Choi PJ, Kurlinafei, Cox CE. Addressing Religion and Spirituality in the Intensive Care Unit, a Survey of Clinicians. Palliat Support Care, 2019, 17, 159-64. doi.org/10.1017/S147-9515-18-0001001 Sat. 35. Albakawi HM, Alkawez N, Almasanju, Alharbi SM, Katimbang CC, Rivera PP, and others. Workplace Spiritual Climate and its Influence on Nurses' Provision of Spiritual Care in Multicultural Hospitals. Religions, 2019, 10, 118th. doi https doi.org 10.3390 Reltun Manion 2118, 36. Cruz JP, Albakawi HM, Alharbi SM, Alicante JG, Vitorino LM, Abunab High. Psychometric Assessment of the Spiritual Climate Scale Arabic version for nurses in Saudi Arabia. J. Nurs ADM Manik, 2018, 26, 485-92. doi https doi.org 10.1111 Janam 12574, 37. Haydari H. Karimolahi M. Marnoush N. Evaluation of the Perception of Iranian Nurses towards Spirituality in NICUs. Iran J. Neonatology, 2016, 7, 35-9. doi.org/10.2038/IJN.2016.7-114. 38. Sadeghi N. Hassanpur M. Haidarzadeh M. Alamolhoda A. Waldman E. Spiritual Needs of Families with Bereavement and Loss of an Infant in the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, a Qualitative Study. J. Pain Symptom. Maneg, 2016, 52, 1, 35-42. doi.org/10.1016/J. Kanesimon.2015.1, 2.3, 4, 4.39. Zumstein Shaha M. Farrell B. Economou D. Nurses' Response to Spiritual Needs of Cancer Patients. Ir J. Onkol Nurs. 2020, 48, 101792. doi https doi.org diasimila-106 j.ajon de milioni e 20.792. Publisher's note. Springer Nature remains neutral with regard to jurisdictional claims in published maps and institutional affiliations.